Coming up on KCCI 8 News Close Up, Iowa has a new lieutenant governor. Meet the person Governor Kim Reynolds tapped to work alongside her. Coming together to keep Iowa schools safe. We break down what the state's school safety task force has found and what that could change.
This is Iowa's news leader. This is KCCI 8 News Close Up.
Good morning and thank you for joining us for KCCI 8 News Close Up. I'm Chief Political Reporter Amanda Rooker. Ahead of the upcoming legislative session, a group of Iowans, including educators and members of law enforcement, are making some recommendations to try and keep classrooms safe. They sit on the governor's school safety task force, and they have been meeting for months, all the way since June. This group wants state lawmakers to take up some new rules for school districts that includes requiring special locks for classroom doors.
It is the recommendation of the task force that all schools evaluate locks that allow the door to be locked from the classroom side without a key, tool, or special knowledge or effort for each attendance center.
The task force has also discussed recommending shatterproof glass for school windows, making sure school buildings have a visitor entry plan, numbering access points for emergency responders, and involving the Department of Education in reviewing emergency operation plans.
It is the recommendation of the task force the legislature consider legislation requiring new school attendance centers incorporate a secure vestibule system designed to provide for identification and vetting of visitors before they enter the school building.
I'm joined now by KCCI's Suzanne Benke, who has extensively been covering school safety efforts in the state. And Suzanne, you've been to many of these task force meetings. So walk me through a little bit about why this group was created and then what those meetings have been like.
In the last legislative session, Amanda, we were coming off the Perry shooting and some of the national school shooting incidents that have been unfortunately happening. And House File 2652, I think I got that number right, dedicated a task force to studying and recommending ways to make schools safer, not just from the classroom, but also infrastructure, plans, reviewing plans, communication. This task force has done a lot of detailed work so far.
And it's been thorough, with meetings since June. And what are some of the things, and walk me also through what's changed from the beginning of those meetings until now? What has the conversation been like?
I can't even begin to tell you how much detail these meetings get into. We're talking about some meetings centering for over an hour on specific types of hardware for classroom doors, right? Like the general consensus is that you want to be able to keep that classroom safe and have it be a way to keep students in and lock a potential intruder or out. And so what locks best do that? What is feasible? We're talking about recommendations that will go to lawmakers that could turn into legislation. And so one of the things that has come up repeatedly, probably more so in like the September, October timeline, was the cost, right? Like some of these door locks, some of these the shatterproof glass, it's expensive. And so I think it's worth noting that these task force members really did work to talk about the financial implications and their concern was that it would be an unfunded mandate, but that's not the mission of the task force. Their task force is really to be looking, studying, reviewing, and then recommending.
And lawmakers aren't required to take up these recommendations, but they will go to lawmakers to consider. What are some of the, you mentioned a little bit locks, infrastructure. What are some of the things that they have discussed recommending?
So one of the things that was at a recent meeting within the last month was numbering on the outside of buildings and on the inside of buildings. And what do I mean by that, right? Like certainly the school has an address with a school number or an address number on it, yes. What we're talking about is the access points, the entry points into the school, having a very visible number and having that number be a part of a plan that law enforcement or emergency responders know about. So it even gets down, the specific recommendation in its current draft form even gets down to how big that number should be and how visible it should be from a certain distance away. Whether or not that language remains in that recommendation, is up to the task force, but to me, that shows the level of detail that they've been getting into. Another thing that I think is worth bringing up is film, which I'm not talking about the video kind. I'm talking about film that can be put over existing glass that makes it shatterproof or shatter resistant, we should say. And again, not a cheap item, but these are small things that schools can do or could do that definitely make a big impact. It doesn't have to be, one of the things that I've come away with is schools don't have to build a brand new building to improve the safety and security that they have in the bricks and mortar. There are things they can do with planning. There are things they can do with drills and communication with first responders and emergency responders. And there are things right down to that door lock that can all enhance safety and security for Iowa schools.
And you mentioned part of this task force was studying, reviewing, coming up with these recommendations.
Yes.
How did they come up with that? What did they study or review? What's currently happening in Iowa schools, what's happening in other states?
A lot of different things. There were some presentations on different types of infrastructure. Your introduction mentioned that there are law enforcement members on the task force. There are several superintendents. There are several others that are from Homeland, I believe the state's Homeland Security or Emergency Management Office. But you also have people that are involved in infrastructure building. Different trades groups have come in with some recommendations and so forth. So it's really getting down to how do you make the building safe, how do you make the classroom safe, but also how do you make those practices safe. And their deadline is coming up. It's December 31st when those recommendations have to be finalized to be sent along to lawmakers.
Because we know that there's that January 13th start date, so it is coming quickly.
It is coming very quickly.
Is this at all building off of what's already been done on school safety in the state? I mean, we see the headlines, out across the country. This is an incredibly important concern to parents and people all across the state. But is there stuff that has been done in Iowa that this is building on?
Absolutely. I think, let's remember that the Governor's School Safety Task Force is something that was created in 2024, but the Governor's School Safety Bureau was created in 2022. And they've already taken some big steps, I think. Number one, we've heard a lot about this year, this Safe and Sound app. Mm-hmm. That was one of the key missions or key goals, I should say, of the Bureau to get that up and running. We've done several stories on that, and I think that has really, the numbers would indicate that school districts, and really anybody can use it, parents, students, people in the community, people in schools, they are seeing that as a good, it's free, it can be anonymous, a good way to get reports of school threats or even mental health needs to first responders and law enforcement right away. I think that's a really big thing that's happening across the state.
Suzanne, that is actually all the time that we have for our discussion, but thank you so much for joining us and sharing your reporting. I know we all appreciate it. We're going to continue talking about school safety when we come back. We'll bring in Emily Piper from the Iowa Association of School Boards, showing you how some schools are thinking about some of the proposed safety changes. We'll be right back. years and years at the Des Moines Register, and then she left and worked for a nonprofit. I'm joined now by Emily Piper from the Iowa Association of School Boards. Thanks for being here to talk about such an important topic, school safety. You have been to these task force meetings. What's your takeaway been from the discussion?
Well, the discussion has been really robust. We've learned a lot. I think the school folks that are there have learned a lot from law enforcement, and I hope that law enforcement has learned a lot from schools. My key takeaway from this is there are three things that I think we ought to be looking at. Number one, what do we do and how do we better protect our staff and students when the intruder is already inside the building, a student or a staff member? How do we keep an intruder from entering the building? And then most importantly, how can we better cooperate and help law enforcement and peace officers, first responders, know what's going on in our building, but also respond to an incident? Those are kind of the three main categories that I think need to be addressed, and I see that the task force has done a good job of kind of segmenting those and coming up with recommendations that should go down that path.
Right. And with Suzanne, we talked a lot about the infrastructure, right? Shatterproof glass, locks on doors. But in many of these school shootings that we see, the intruder is already in the building or is a student. So what was their discussion on how to address that potential threat?
Right, and I think that's the biggest challenge that we face is that nationally, nearly 70% of active shooter incidents in schools are done by somebody who's already there. So the discussion has been about improving their ability to communicate with law enforcement. Their discussion has been about increasing monitoring cameras in places like hallways that are not necessarily monitored. And then there's obviously the discussion on the classroom locks and their ability to lock the doors. Will those solve all of the problems? No, but I think they're getting into a place where we're giving schools, both private and public schools, some ideas and tools that would help when that student or a staff member or a family member is already in the building.
I know you work with schools, large schools, small schools, and see kind of the differences there. Is there thought about how this would actually be implemented? Because it sounds like a lot of money to make a lot of these changes.
So the task force has had a lot of discussion on that, and that's been one of our biggest concerns is what happens because a Waukee is very different from a small school in southern Iowa. They have a different set of resources. They have more buildings. I think that the task force has gone down a path to say one size doesn't fit all. And locally, you need to sit down and figure out what is the best steps that you can take to protect. The money issue is always going to be there, and it's difficult to say that because you can't put a price on safety, but it's a reality both for the private and the public schools. So understanding that some things may work better for other districts than it does for a large district is really going to be a key component. The other part of it is we cannot have this conversation without talking about mental health. There is a direct correlation between these active shooter incidents and mental health. And so the task force does acknowledge that it was not part of their charge. Okay. But they do acknowledge that is something the legislature needs to take a look at.
And I don't have exact data with me, but I have been hearing and talking about the lack of mental health therapists in schools across the state, just the lack of access and disparity, especially in more rural areas. But even here, in Des Moines and metro schools as well, that lack of access exists there too.
Yeah, I think there's three things we can do there. We have a lack of workforce in general, and that creates the problem getting them into schools. We can do some things to try to increase the workforce. We need to really expand what we're doing with respect to mental health services delivered via telehealth in schools. That will help some of those deserts. And number three, we need to figure out how we better coordinate with still protecting the students' privacy between the school, the parents, the therapists, and law enforcement so they know that this is a child at risk.
My other question for you is, we've seen task force meetings on all sorts of issues, on childcare, on things. How does this actually translate into action? For parents who may be listening and say, hey, a lot of this sounds great, but how do I know that there will actually be action from this? From your work at lobbying, how often do you see recommendations like this actually get taken up?
I think because of the high visibility of school safety across the country, the legislature is going to take action. But I also think that a lot of the recommendations really don't need a law. Schools are going to see this, parents are going to see this, they're going to go to their school boards, or they're going to go to the board that oversees their private school, and they're going to say, hey, we want you to investigate and go ahead and do this. We don't need a law to do it. So I think it's a two-way street. The parents and the community is going to engage and ask them, for instance, numbering the access points. That's a really easy thing to do. I know that one of the members of the task force said after the Franklin, Tennessee shooting, her families came to her and said, we want to investigate shatter-resistant film on glass. So I think that is part of it. But the legislature is going to do something, and we are going to work with them to make sure that it works for every type of school and every size of district.
Well, Emily, thank you. Our conversation will continue right after this break. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Stay with us. Welcome back to Close Up. We are continuing our conversation now with Emily Piper from the Iowa Association of School Boards. Thanks for being with us to talk about school safety and to talk about what the new School Safety Task Force has discussed and talked about as we head into this next legislative session. We've talked about many of the recommendations that they've discussed making, a lot of infrastructure changes, and just now talking about a little bit what could that actually mean for schools. What are maybe some of the barriers that schools may face in trying to implement some of those changes?
I think the biggest barrier they're going to face is cost and making a local decision as to what kind of investment do we do. I know when districts are building new buildings, they generally work into the cost of that new building a lot of the safety measures that we're talking about, but it becomes a much bigger challenge for retrofitting existing buildings. So they'll take a look at, is the shatter resistant film the best investment of scarce dollars, or are we better off putting locks on classroom doors? A lot of the recommendations are really, I wouldn't call them low-hanging fruit, but they're ones that don't require a significant financial investment. It's when we get into the vestibule entryways and increasing the ability to communicate in dead zones within schools, increasing our video monitoring capability, that we start to talk about money. And money should not be the sole driving factor, but it is a reality. And so our goal is to make sure that whatever the legislature adopts, that they either provide us some additional resources or recognize that locally the boards of these schools need to make a decision about what is the most vulnerable points in our building that we need to protect.
Is there at all, I guess, a tracking or a looking at, starting next school year, where are all of the different schools across the state at?
So schools are very reluctant to share what security measures they're putting in place. Our emergency response plans are confidential, and they're reluctant to do that because they don't want to let somebody know, hey, here's the vulnerability, here's where we're at. So, from a tracking standpoint, no, and collecting that data is really sensitive because they don't want to advertise to somebody that, hey, this door might be open so you can get in, or here's how you can have a mass of people standing here. So there's really no tracking system. I think it'll come down to schools will comply with the law. And if the law requires them to do that, they'll figure out a way to make it work. What we hope is that we can balance that with what is the financial investment needed and what are the things that are going to address the vulnerabilities for each district.
What is that financial investment needed? Does it change per school district?
It will change per school district, and it's really going to depend. I mean, there are estimates all over the board. We're looking at glazing some of those larger ground level windows. Could be a six-figure project for a school, depending on how many windows they have. And if you have a district with multiple buildings, obviously that increases exponentially. If you're looking at $500 to $1,000 for a door lock that is capable of being locked so no one can enter that classroom, if you've got 40 classrooms, you're looking at $40,000. So those are the types of things that the districts are going to have to balance and decide with input from the community, what do we think is the best way to protect our staff and students?
Thinking about being the liaison between some of the school boards, districts, and lawmakers ahead of session, what are they saying about what they want from lawmakers given what this task force
Well,
is
what they would say is that they would like some assistance, some resources to help them do these things. It's not that they aren't willing to do these things, but it's just, it does come with a price tag. I think a lot of them would say we need more help with mental health. That is one of the top issues that we hear from our members day in and day out. And we really need to focus in on that. They don't necessarily have a solution, but mental health. And then the third thing, there are some simple things we can do to increase school resource officers in schools and provide some funding for that as well. And I think that's something that has been a recommendation from a lot of national groups, that helps with the students who feel like they have someone to go to.
And quickly, we don't have a lot of time left, but I know you mentioned separately from school safety, a lot of schools are also thinking about wanting more for preschool.
Early literacy is a hot topic in Iowa. The governor, the Department of Education, our schools know that we need to do something on early literacy. The data is there, the facts are there. We need to invest so that our low-income kids are going to preschool full day. Otherwise, they don't catch up with their peers. It's a good investment early, or you have to try to fix the problem later. We know we can fix it early, so we're really hopeful that we will provide full funding for those kids.
Well, Emily, thank you so much for being here with us this morning. We appreciate it. Still to come on Close Up, Iowa has a new lieutenant governor. Governor Reynolds made her pick 3 months after her previous number 2 resigned. We have more on that new lieutenant governor after the break. Welcome back to Close Up. The state of Iowa has a new lieutenant governor. Governor Kim Reynolds has selected Republican Senator Chris Cournoyer. Cournoyer is from LeClaire in eastern Iowa, and some Republican insiders said they were surprised by the pick, although many had heard Cournoyer's name in discussion. Most complimented the governor's decision, saying it's historic to now have 2 women leading the state. Others say Cournoyer is reliably conservative, has been a strong voice for Republicans in the Iowa Senate, and will be helpful in carrying out the governor's policy priorities.
It's an honor and somewhat surreal to be standing at this podium as Iowa's lieutenant governor.
Iowa's new second in command, Chris Cournoyer, says she never planned on holding public office. But when a school safety concern went unanswered, she ran and won a spot on the Pleasant Valley School Board. It was her start in government.
Her first instinct isn't just to wonder why something isn't working right or to complain. It's actually to get in there and fix the problem herself.
Reynolds says that's the quality she was looking for.
She takes responsibility, she gets her hands dirty, and she does the work. And the people of Iowa couldn't ask for more in a lieutenant governor, and neither can I.
Cournoyer has represented Eastern Iowans in the Iowa Senate since 2019. She chaired the Education Budget Committee and was vice chair of the State Government Committee. She also has a degree in computer science and experience in the technology sector, designing websites and teaching robotics and coding.
Whether I'm programming software in the private sector or in a classroom with students or in a committee room crafting legislation, I'm there to do a job. The same is true in the role I'm taking today, which involves advancing the governor's agenda in any way I possibly can.
The first all-woman duo of governor and lieutenant governors was Sarah Huckabee Sanders and Leslie Rutledge of Arkansas, and Maura Healey and Kim Driscoll of Massachusetts. All 4 were elected in 2022 and sworn into office in 2023, whereas Kim Reynolds appointed Chris Cournoyer, but the 2 of them in Iowa mark the 3rd all-woman team in the country. Well, thank you for joining us for KCCI 8 News Close Up. We'll see you back here next Sunday. Have a great day.